if my kids can really know that, and if my grandkids can really know that, and great grandkids can, we can continue that trajectory that my mom worked really hard and sacrificed so much to set us up on. And that's the thing for all of us who are living, even if we don't have ancestors who did that, which I'm sure everyone has ancestors in their past that changed the trajectory of their families. They might just not know about it, but we can all take the time now to start capturing that legacy so that our family members are not sleepwalking through life either, that we can
So
all be
true.
consciously open and awake and living meaningfully.
Hey, everybody, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm joined by Pantea Fozouni, who is with Palm Desert Law Group, and I'm so excited for our conversation today. Pantea, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Sean. How are you doing?
Hanging in there. We go back a little bit. We met through a networking group here in the Coachella Valley, and just had kind of struck this connection at the time you were pregnant. And when I first met you, and you've since had little Arjun,
Mhm.
and actually, we've had the privilege of sitting together and documenting your life story with your husband. And actually, Arjun was sitting on your lap and on his lap at some point during that interview. So I'm getting ahead of myself and sharing too much about our connection. But I love to start my conversations with my guests with probably the easiest question I'll ask you all day, and that is, if you had to tell me your life story in under 5 minutes, how would you do that?
I find it interesting that you think that that's the easiest question that you're gonna ask all day.
Yeah, sarcasm for sure, for sure.
Well, it's definitely been a pleasure knowing you for quite a bit. In terms of my story, I don't know if 5 minutes is truly gonna be enough time since we spent quite a bit time, talking about it previously, but in a nutshell, I was born in a different country. I was born in Iran. In the middle of the Iran-Iraq War. My family was pretty comfortable, pretty well-to-do there. Um, but in addition to myself, I had an older brother who was 13 at the time. My sister was about 16 at the time. I was about 2, and my mom just had it with Iran. She didn't want to live there anymore. She didn't
Mm,
want to be in war anymore. The war had already been raging for about 5 years by that point.
mhm.
But since my brother was 13, that's the age when they were actually brainwashing these young teenage boys literally to send them out into fields just to clear minefields. And they were telling these
Oh my
boys that
gosh.
it's their obligation to God and that's what God wants. And um, even though my parents had been religious prior to the Iranian Revolution, that really came to a crash after the regime change and all of that. So that was really the final straw. My mom was determined at that point to take us out of Iran. So like I mentioned, when I was 2, my brother was 13, my sister was 16. That's when the 4 of us moved to the United States. We had a
Mm.
couple pit stops in Europe before we got out here. My mom was incredible raising 3 kids in a country as a someone my age now at this point in her late 30s without her husband, by herself, um, and really made it. And it wasn't until several years later when my father finally joined us, and he is a physician and he had to literally start from scratch, even though he'd been a practicing physician for close to 30 years by that point. He started all over again, taking his exams, doing his residency. So when people talk about that American dream, especially the American dream that immigrants have, that's 100% the story of my family and how we
Wow.
ended up here. So I've been here since I was 2. I've definitely taken advantage of all of the opportunities afforded to us being here that my mom worked so hard to provide for us. My entire family is in medicine. I decided to become, well, not to become the black sheep. I kind of feel like I always was the black sheep, but I definitely solidified that when I decided to go to law school instead of medical school. Um, so
Boo,
I'm
boo.
definitely the odd one out in the family in that regard. It was a little challenging at the time, but I think everyone's pretty thankful since, at least I'm assuming so, since everyone in the family calls me every other day with legal questions. So I
Yeah.
think it worked out pretty well. A couple more details. I ended up moving down here to the Coachella Valley about 8 years ago. Ended up meeting hadn't met my husband by then, but we were just friends, and now we've been together for about 7 years. Through him, I have my 3 beautiful children. I have a soon-to-be 15-year-old stepdaughter, bonus daughter, Sophia. We have a 3.5-year-old little boy, Aizhang, and I made another person too, so I've got a 2-year-old little boy, Kamran, as well, and they're the absolute joys of my entire life.
So sweet. Yeah, Kamran actually was the one that was sitting in your lap during our interview. And so maybe Arjang, I think you were pregnant with Arjang when I first met you.
I think
And
when you
then
first met me, yeah, then I
yeah,
just had
wow.
Kamran when we did our interview together. We like to joke and call Kamran baby Prozac because he's just a love bug, and anytime you're sad, you can just hold on to him and you just feel better. The world is just better when he's around.
He is such a sweetheart. I know you went to law school, but what specific type of law? And talk a little bit about your business and what you specialize in now.
Sure. Here at Palm Desert Law, we really focus on estate planning as well as business law for small and medium sized businesses, mostly for our estate planning clients. Really, what it comes down to is that I really love helping people take care of the business of their lives. So that's everything from getting really financially organized in a way that most of us either don't do or that some of us actively avoid doing. So I help them really do that. I help them build their businesses when they have business ideas. I help them really think through how they're living their lives. Of course, all from a legal perspective, but it's really about helping people maximize what they're doing here while they're living, especially for those who are building their legacies, as well as planning for after they're passed away to make sure that the legacy that they've worked so hard to create actually continues in the ways that they want for the people that they care about.
That's great. So, yeah, if you had to summarize in a nutshell, like why it makes it so important for families, especially, it sounds like even business professionals to have a will or a trust in place, some sort of estate plan. Like, why is it so important?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of misconceptions that comes to estate planning. A lot of times people think that only certain people need to do that, either people who are retired or people who are retiring or people who have a lot of money. That's the
Mm,
typical thing that people think about. But really, what estate planning is thinking through how you want to be living your life. And from
mm,
there, thinking about what you want to happen after you're no longer here so that the two kind of meet together. Most of
mm,
us really spend our lives and our times just go, 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 going, being active without really having a clear idea and vision for where they want to go, where what they want their lives to end up living. And so those people, most people, myself included for the longest time, we really sleepwalk through our lives. But something very interesting happens when we sort of wake up and we start thinking and realizing we're actually not immortal. No person who has ever lived yet has escaped death. It's something that, I mean, it could happen just because it hasn't happened before theoretically doesn't mean that it can't happen to you, but for most of us, death is going to come one day. It's part of the contract that we signed to be born and to be human. And so
yeah.
when we start thinking about that, and not just from an existential dread kind of a perspective, but actually accepting that that's a part of life and
Mm,
realizing, okay, we do have this finite amount of time that we have here on earth. What are we going to do with it? And then after we're gone, what do we want people to say about us? What do we want people to think
mm,
about us? What do we want to create when we're here? What do we want to happen with those creations? This shift happens and we
yeah.
wake up and we're able to live our lives even more fully. So I know this is kind of getting into a little bit of woo woo categories, but
No.
it's so important for everyone to think about, everyone from the time that they're 18 on, but it's particularly important when we have children ourselves, because once we have children ourselves and we become parents, all of a sudden it's not just about us anymore. We have these people who depend on us literally for their lives and for everything they need. we have to think about what do we want to happen for them if something happens to us? Because if we don't think about those things, it's really left up to chance. It's left up to strangers. It's left up to defaults
Mm,
and laws that may or may not be right
yeah.
for us. And so that's why thinking about what happens, it's so important. So a lot of times people think it's just about documents. It's actually not about documents. Estate planning really is the thought process of thinking about all of those pieces. And the legal documents that come out of it are just one piece of the puzzle
Mm,
amongst many other pieces that need to be considered. But it's hard for us as humans to really start grasping all of those things. And if I start talking about all of those things, then I start losing people. Whereas most people have heard of a will and they've heard of a trust and they've heard about some of these other documents. It's easier to get people in and start talking about those things. And then through sessions with me, then we can start picking apart and thinking about the other bigger pieces.
yeah. I one word that you said a while ago that's just been rolling around and stuck with me is just your legacy, right? And I think having an estate plan in place, a lot of people associate a big part of their legacy, I think, with what they're leaving behind financially with their
Hmm.
children. Um, and you also mentioned something about, thinking about how we want to be remembered, what we want people to think about us when we're gone. We've had conversations before about the importance of our story, our family history in particular, as a big puzzle piece in the grand scheme of, the legacy that we leave behind. And it's not to say that we shouldn't have sound financial planning right in place, or a plan for who's gonna watch my children if something were to happen to my wife and I, if we're on a flight or something. It's really, really important to have those documents in place, because otherwise we're being, we're relegated to the California right plan, or which we have the benefit of having. I don't know if it's the same in other states, but anyway, all that to say, what is, you know, can you share a little bit about where you think family history, well, actually, let me ask you an even more pointed question. Are there documents or um, just procedures in place within, like, the estate planning process that are specifically tied to, your family history, like heirlooms, for example, that are in your family? Like, how is there an overlap? Is there a connection between what you do and, like, preserving family history?
So, in the legal system in general, it's really focused on what we think of as legacy in terms of assets and
Mm,
stuff.
mm,
So, most estate planning, most attorneys are focused on the stuff, the assets, the property, the homes, lands, condo, the bank accounts, the retirement accounts, um, life
mhm,
insurance, those type of big assets that we think about. That's what most attorneys are thinking about because we're trained, especially being very right brain, very left brain, very analytical, to be thinking about just money and numbers because
mhm.
our society has evolved in such a way that we're very materialistically focused and that's
Yeah.
huge. We work
Mhm,
hard, we want to make sure that we're providing for ourselves, we're providing for our families as well. But to me, that's only a small part of your history and your legacy. To me, legacy is really about people's stories, it's their values, it's their experiences, it's what they've
mm,
gone through. To me, that's the important stuff because typically money runs out. It's a very common saying about rags to riches, back to rags within 3 generations. That happens so commonly that you've got one
mhm,
generation who really works very hard, builds a lot of wealth, doesn't spend a lot of it themselves because they're so focused on their children. Their children get raised having access to that money and that capital, and so they don't really learn how to work very hard because they don't have to because everything's provided to them.
mhm,
And so they often spend what their parents have worked so hard to provide, And it gets to the point when they have their own children, there's really nothing left for the children. And so the children are back to the same place that the grandparents or the great grandparents were before that generation started to change things for them.
Yeah.
It's very, very rare in our society for huge generational wealth to be created and then preserved for generations and generations on. It
Mhm.
does happen. That's why the news is always focused on those stories. But for the average family, that's really not what happens. And so
Mm.
to me, it's really about the values and the stories. That's what really matters because if we're able to preserve those and pass
Yeah.
those down, that's how we change the trajectory for families. So in my own family, we came from we're immigrants. I literally wasn't born here. I was born in a different country. And so things like genealogy.com, they're great, but they're great if you are from the population that that's focused on. That's never gonna work
Mm.
for me because Iran's not part of that and all of that. And I
Yeah.
remember, I've got my parents, I've got my grandparents. I knew 2 of my grandparents, my grandmothers. My grandfathers had already passed away before I was born, and one of my grandmothers was very ill, had dementia by the time I knew her. The other one, best woman on the planet. I swear she was
Mm.
an angel here on earth. She just passed away last year. Couple
Oh.
days ago, last year, so we just came up on her one-year anniversary.
Oh, wow.
And even though we had a very close relationship, by the time I was old enough to really know her, she'd already forgotten so much of the family story and the history. And I actually asked my parents recently, "Well, tell me about your grandparents." And so they shared a few
Mm.
things, but they were kids too when their grandparents, my great grandparents, passed away. So
Yeah.
I don't actually know that much about my ancestors, which is very common for people. But I know in my family, my mom is the one who has changed the trajectory of her family by
Mm.
making the decision to come here to the US, the sacrifices that she made, how difficult it was for her and everything she faced. She
Mhm.
literally changed the trajectory of her family. And so for me personally, it's very important that my children know that. And
Yeah.
my mom's also she's 75 right now. My father is 80 years old right now.
Mm.
My son is 3.5. My other one is 2.
Yeah.
It's very possible that they're not gonna have clear memories of them. It's possible that if I have another child, my other child may never even know my parents at all. And so these stories are really what we have. And so the legal system doesn't focus on these things in our office. This is huge. And so part of what makes us different is that we want to capture these family stories, which is why included in all of our planning sessions, we always do these kind of legacy interviews. Now, it's nowhere near as nice as what you do, which is why I was so excited when we connected and you told me about what you do because you actually create beautiful films and stories and capture photos and images and different stories. What you do is amazing and mind blowing. What I do is on a tiny, tiny, tiny little scale but we start having these
Yeah.
conversations. And we do that every time we meet with our clients, whether it's every 3 years for all of our clients, or we have a membership program that we have where we meet with certain clients every year instead for clients who opt into it. And then we're able
Mhm.
to record more of these. And the idea is hopefully we can create a library of these conversations that their children are going to have and their grandchildren and great grandchildren, because that's really what matters. If we can keep the heart of what my mom and what my father went through, because it was
Yeah.
equally challenging for my dad, just in different ways. And if my kids can really know that, and if my grandkids can really know that, and great grandkids can, we can continue that trajectory that my mom worked really hard and sacrificed so much
Mhm.
to set us up on. And that's the thing for all of us who are living, even if we don't have ancestors who did that, which I'm sure everyone has ancestors in their past that changed the trajectory of their families. They might just not know about it, but we can all take the time now to start capturing that legacy so that our family members are not sleepwalking through life either, that we can
That's
all
real.
be consciously open and awake and living meaningfully.
That's it. Yeah. Oh, so well said, Pantea. And, you know, your mom, obviously, her story is foundational to your growth as a human, certainly the career path you went on. I think a lot of your resilience and, just your grit probably came from that. What kinds of, like, how did your mom go about actually telling you this story? Do you remember, like, explicit times where she would sit the kids down and have these conversations, or have you just kind of heard it, or, like, how did that go about in your family?
So definitely not. There was definitely no systematic way of doing things. It was typically, when we were going through things, she was definitely in survival mode, and I do not blame her at all. Coming here, having a 2-year-old, having 2 teenagers, she was very typical story of terrified of being in this new place and pedophiles and murderers and all of these things that the news talks about, which is very real, but also the news also sensationalizes things.
Sure.
But she also dealt with my brother, who was a challenge, and dealt with my sister, who was a challenge in different ways. So it was definitely not a very organized, let's sit down and talk about these things. It was
Yeah.
very much survival mode for the longest time, which is how we all live our lives for the most
Yeah.
part, in survival mode. But then it was later on when things were calmer, and then we would be sitting around and kind of looking back and reflecting, and she'd be like, it was really hard when we did that. We never planned to come to the US. We were gonna stay in Austria, and we had landed there with my father's brother's family, and he made a comment that my mom did not like about
Mhm.
him raising his brother's children that really rubbed my mom the wrong way, and that's how we got here. But it's anecdotally through stories later on, usually years later, that this stuff comes up. And I
Mm.
personally want more stories, so I'm constantly asking, "Well, what about this and what about that?" And
Yeah.
my parents' response is typically, that's not important." It's
Oh
like,
my gosh.
"Yeah, it's vitally
Don't you
important."
just hate
So
that? Oh.
I get it, for
Yeah, yeah,
them,
yeah.
it's like ancient history, but for me, it's so very much alive, which is
Mm,
why I wanna change that for my family. And of course, I say the typical thing that everyone does. I'm gonna write a letter every single week, and I have a 3.5-year-old, and I've written
yeah.
1.5 letters.
No, yeah, totally. No, I know. Let's not go there because then we're just gonna feel so super guilty. Uh, I'm curious, I love, uh, the fact that you do these legacy interviews as part of your, estate planning packages. Have you taken the time to record your mom at all? Like, her voice or anything when you do, have the courage to, like, maybe just, like, kinda start the recording on your phone and be like, "Hey, mom, I was thinking about that one story when you immigrated to the United States. You wanna talk about that a little bit?"
So I haven't done that with my mom, but I have done that with my dad. Like,
Oh,
I have
good.
stealthily hit the record button as my dad has gone on about whatever story from when he was in the Air Force. Like, my dad has cool stories. Like, he was in the Air
Yeah.
Force. He was one of those parachuters, like, not shooters,
The
paratroopers. Like,
paratroopers. Yeah.
yeah, the ones who would jump out of airplanes.
Yeah.
And he's a doctor. It's not like he was in
Wow.
war or in battle. Like, my dad would literally jump out of airplanes for, like, shits and giggles kind of a
Yeah.
thing, and I've never had that situation, but I love skydiving. I've gone skydiving 3 times, and I'm thinking, "Here I am an anomaly," and then
It's
later
cool.
on, I found out from my brother that he's gone skydiving the half a dozen times or a dozen times or more, and
Wow.
we never connected it to the fact that my dad literally did that for fun,
Yeah.
whereas everyone's like, "Why would you jump out of a perfectly good airplane?" And I'm like, "I don't know, but it's amazing." But it's like, "Oh, it's kinda in my
That's so
DNA."
cool.
Like, how cool is that? But there's so many connections that we just never realize. Like, I have a bonus daughter. When I was serious with my now husband, fiance at the time, I remember my mom saying, "Don't tell your grandmother," her mom in Iran, don't the one who just passed away last year. She's like, "Don't tell
Mm.
her, she's not gonna understand, she's gonna have a problem with that. Divorce is a big no-no in Persian culture, and
Mhm.
you've never been married, so it looks bad, blah, blah, blah." So for the longest it didn't feel right to me, but, I listened to my mom because it's your mom, you gotta listen.
Yeah.
And that just didn't sit right with me, and then sometime my grandmother brought it up, I think my mom finally told her, And then from there, it was always great. She loved my daughter. Every time my daughter was with us, she would hop on, and I wholeheartedly believe she loved my daughter the
Yeah.
same way she loved any of her other great grandchildren. So she just had so much love to give. And then I found out recently when I asked my mom about her great grandparents, I found out recently that my grandmother's favorite brother, who I've met, who I love very much, that was actually her half brother because her father had passed away and my
Mm,
great grandmother had remarried at 10 years later and had another child with her second husband. And that turned out to be
yeah.
my great uncle, who was literally my grandmother's favorite person in the entire world. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. Her favorite person was her half sibling, so why on earth would she have a problem with his stepdaughter? So, but we don't make these connections unless we know the story. So that's
That's
why I
right.
love talking about these stories because these stories
Yeah.
are what matter. We get so obsessed with TV, and my parents are very obsessed with Turkish television shows and they want to talk about those. I'm like, but our family history is so much more interesting. Like, let's talk about some of that stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I wanna go back to something that you said, and I'm very flattered by just the praise that you heaped on me and my business, and I'm very proud of the work that we do. But, you know, I think one thing that separates video specifically, and some of what you do from the competition, we'll call it the competition, the Storyworths of the world, the books. It's fantastic. There's so much information that we should glean from them, but there's something so incredibly powerful about someone's voice.
Mhm.
And I think although technology is getting, more and more accessible, it is quite easy to take video of yourself. I think it's less intimidating to just like record your voice, which is why I love what you do. And I'm gonna keep like I'm gonna applaud you on that, like, hey, maybe we can step up the equipment that you're using, but don't change the system, right? Like keep recording those voices. Have you had any clients come back to you after having done some of these legacy interviews? Maybe a loved one passed away and they came back and just talked about how important, how valuable having these recordings of their loved one is?
So we haven't had that situation yet. So knock on wood that that doesn't happen for a while because we do want our loved ones to be around as long as possible.
Of
But
course.
something that has come up is that a lot of times people are very resistant to doing the videos. And I always tell them, you don't have to, it's completely optional. However, it's a really amazing experience. And so sometimes because of the trust that I built up with the clients, even if they don't want to do it, they trust me and they let
Yeah.
me guide them through that. And I have very more times than not, or more times that I can even count, people have come back and said, "Thank you so much. That
Mm.
really was a wonderful experience." A lot of times there's crying that
Oh,
happens.
yeah.
It's a really good positive release. And I've gotten feedback later on, even weeks later, the experience was just so powerful to have a guided, true conversation with someone who legitimately is interested in their story, how just having that experience is changes people's lives and how they view things and how they interact with other people.
Yeah.
Um, so
So
that's
true.
when I say it's my favorite part of the process, it literally is my
Yeah.
absolute favorite part of the process because it's the life-changing stuff. I love doing all the legal stuff. I mean, I am a very right-brained, no, left-brained analytical person. I love details. I'm a huge super nerd. I love the fine print and all of that, but
Yeah.
it's the people stuff that really matters. That's
Yeah.
why I'm in this area of the law as opposed to so many other things that can do. It's the
For
people. The people are really what matters, and stories are what matters, and our society is what matters, and that's one of the ways that we as individuals can impact the huge collective.
Absolutely. Yeah, and your experience, in watching what these interviews can do for a person from like a personal perspective, the emotional release, there's a ton of research to support that, and I wish more people did it even just for that
Mhm.
reason, earlier I asked you about your mom and whether she had, told any stories and, when they brush it off like, like it's not important. I mean, I've struggled and I've already mentioned this in some of my other interviews. So if my grandparents are watching this and they see this, I'm sorry, grandma and grandpa, but they're very hesitant to share their story, even though
Mhm.
I've said, "Hey, I want to come, or I want to set up cameras and lights, and I want to interrogate you for 3." No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to interrogate them. I think honestly, that's kind of the way they perceive it, though, is that it's
Yeah.
like, "Hey, let's dig up all the trauma." And it's like, man, I just know that you were both part of like incredibly like big families with like 8 children, 12 children. But what I love about the fact that we sat down together is that when you compare, you and your husband to the people that I'm typically sitting with, you're quite a few decades younger than, so I don't know, can you speak a little bit to just the importance of especially young families, like taking this work, and I mean the work of preserving your story in a meaningful way, whether that's through video biography or just somehow collecting your photos in a meaningful way.
What I love about what you do is that you capture moments in time. And so when you have older clients nearing what they perceive to be the end of their lives, that can feel really overwhelming because they have to go over 50, 60, 80,
Yeah.
90 years of history. And that can feel really hard because some of it they may have lost in terms of the timeline. They might be feeling a pressure to get it right and to get it
Yeah.
perfect. It's also a lot of things that can be difficult that are buried to bring that up, and they could have
Yep.
just forgotten a lot of it. I
Yeah.
wholeheartedly believe that what you do is so valuable that every person, especially from the time they have children, they should be meeting with you at least every 5 years to
Mhm.
record
Yeah.
because more than 5 years, you forget things. And
Totally.
so, what I loved about meeting with you a few years ago now was I think my husband and I were around the 5 year mark. And I remember when we were talking about it, I said, I want to do it. And you're like, you're way younger than my normal. I'm like, but that's why it's important because I that session with my husband was really funny because he was definitely meandering and rambling and kinda going on in circles, and I think on the video, you can probably see me getting a little bit annoyed and trying to, like, ring him back in,
Reel
and
'em
then
in, yeah, yeah.
at the end, you asked
They're
me
actually
about
if you're
the
watching this, forgive us, please, while we talk about
he knows. It's okay.
he knows, yeah, that's right,
It's
that's
not meant as a judgment or a criticism, and he knows I love him more than, like, anything. It's just meant that, like, people approach things in different ways,
yeah,
and so I think when I got to my part, like, in, like, 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I, like, succinctly, like, "This is what happened, and this would happen, and this would
yeah.
happen, this is what"
Very left
like,
brain,
very
just straight to
factually
the
to
point,
kind of
yeah.
fill in the details.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
which is the exact opposite of how I started off this interview, so it's really funny to me kinda looking back. I'm like, "You should probably edit in that part, to
No,
answer
no,
the
no.
first question 'cause it's very matter of fact." But it's so important because he was, let's say, 45 when we recorded that, and he's giving you all of these details about his childhood, good and bad. I guarantee you in another 40 years from now, he's not gonna remember any of those details
Yeah,
from his childhood. And so because we were able to capture that, our sons are gonna be able to watch that video and be like, "Wow, we did not know everything that our father went through."
yep, yeah,
And
totally.
so they're not going to understand their father was the way that he was because of those experiences. Now,
Mhm.
my husband and I are working really, really hard, just like I know so many of us in our generation are, to really heal the generational trauma
Yeah,
that we've been given,
mhm.
which is hard,
Yeah.
hard, 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 hard. But capturing this stuff as we go, you can see the evolutions of people and you can see the evolutions of stories. I'm so glad we recorded that. I think,
Yeah.
like you said, Cameron was literally in my lap at one point.
Mhm.
He's going to be able to see that when he's a 60-year-old
Mm,
man or an
man,
80
oh
year
my
old man
gosh.
and remember
Yeah.
not remember, but at least see himself in his mother's arms when she was young and beautiful, as opposed to probably the last memories he's gonna have of me. Hopefully, me being really old and frail
Old and
and
beautiful. You'll be
but
old and beautiful,
but who
Pantea.
knows? I could be in a car accident tomorrow and I could be
That's
gone.
true.
and he's probably
And you said
gonna have.
earlier, that even they're actually like, he's not gonna maybe have these memories 10, 20 years from now. That's assuming that we're even around,
Yep.
and that's a big assumption. And, I think in a lot of ways we're both up against the same, um, I don't wanna say excuses, but we're up against the same issues or, barriers to overcome, especially when it comes to young families who just think, "Oh, I'll get around to that, like, eventually." And
Yep.
I just like you, you're so glad that you did this. I mean, I'm glad that we sat down together and, built an estate plan for our family when we did, even though we were in our early 30s. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that relief, it's already so huge, and I know we'll have to go back and adjust it over the next 10 years, but I don't know, what would you how do you address those, I don't know, just the resistance that you get, especially from younger families when there's no sense of urgency? Like, how do you create a sense of urgency when it
Mhm.
seems like there's not one?
So you have to meet people where they are. And so if they don't understand why it's important to do this work, you're not gonna be
Mm,
able to convince them or change them.
mhm.
So something that we've started doing, we've always been doing it for a long time, and then we kinda took a break during COVID because of life. And something that we brought back in full force is really education. So I've got a great marketing team and agency now that if you open up if you I don't know how the magic works. I don't know how the technology works, but if you're thinking at all about estate planning and you live in this area, chances are Facebook and Instagram are going to tell you about these events that I do. So every month I host typically one in person, one webinar kind of event so we can talk about estate planning. Um, and so if you even think about it, that's how crazy the technology is becoming these days. If you start thinking about it, it's going to start popping up. And so we're trying to build awareness about why this is so important
Yeah.
through doing it that way. So that's kind of how we've been getting a lot more people interested and kind of knowing about this. But if someone is not ready, they're not going to be able to do that. So the
Yeah.
more we talk about it, the more um, people are gonna start realizing it and start thinking about it. So it's so important for you to just tell everyone about what you do, put
Mm,
these videos that you do out. You do so much amazing things here in the community, just talking about it more, that's gonna be where it's gonna become. And I tell everyone. I tell everyone about these legacy interviews. I tell
mhm.
everyone about our experience with you because it's valuable. And like I said, I wholeheartedly believe that if you're a young family,
Uh,
they should be meeting with you every 5 years to just do a capture, do a capture.
Something
We were
simple.
able
Yeah.
to talk about our kids when they were really, really young. When I had my first child, I remembered everything from the first word to the songs I sang him to bowel movements to all sorts of crazy things, and I'm like, "How can people possibly forget this? Like, what time they were born?" It drives me crazy. My mom doesn't remember what time I was born. And now as my kids are getting older and that stuff is getting filtered out, I don't remember those details. I
Yeah,
I
isn't that
don't
crazy?
remember I don't remember how old my oldest son was when he took the first time he crawled or it's just human, it's just natural. But if we do a video every 5 years, I can tell you what's happened in the last 5 years and then what's
Yeah.
happened in the last 5 years. And so having these libraries, we spend so much time watching other people's stories and movies, like,
Oh
I
my
love the
gosh.
idea of having this of our own. That's
Yeah,
what
I
I
know.
honestly believe everyone who has young kids should absolutely be doing this with you at least every 5 years.
I love that, Pantea. Well,
It's the
you heard
best
it from
investment.
Pantea. You heard it from her. You guys need to come talk to me every 5 years. So, I think one other thing that's
Mhm,
fascinating to watch, especially as we look back on, like, what your mother and grandmother, the assets that they have at their disposal,
mhm,
um, there's just way less pictures
mhm.
or, family heirlooms, and
That's also part of the reason why I haven't gotten you photos because I have a photo album from when I was a kid, and there's maybe 20 pictures total in there,
oh,
and part of
Well,
that is so sad because we were in
mm,
Iran and there wasn't a lot of that, and then when we came to the US, I was the 3rd kid, and 3rd
yeah,
kids always get forgotten, and we were really poor back then, so we didn't have the means to have a lot of this stuff, and then with technology and phones makes it easier, but then it's just captured on those kinds of
yeah.
things.
Then it's, like, overwhelming in a different sense, right? So, like, I'm like,
Yep.
"You have 20 pictures from your childhood? Like, we need all of those digitized ASAP so that we can just
Yeah.
put them." It's
But it
easy to
makes me
tell.
sad. It makes me
No,
so sad
yeah,
that there's
I
literally
understand.
only, like, 20 pictures of me and
Yep. I don't have a whole lot from my childhood, and, part of my story is when I was a teenager, one of the houses that I lived in burned down, and we had a lot of assets in there that unfortunately got lost to fire damage. But in the last several months, like, I've stumbled across little photo collages, or, like, I had one VHS tape that my grandparents that refused to do a video biography. Grandma, grandpa, if you're watching this, they gave me this VHS tape, and I've digitized it and just, like, just eating it up, right?
Mhm.
Because it puts you back in a place and a time, and it actually kind of, like, it opens the door for communication with your family. Like, I know that I've watched this VHS tape with my mom, and it helps me to ask the right questions, questions that I wouldn't have even known to ask, because it's like, "Oh, who is that person that you just mentioned in the video?" Or, and then you start learning about these relationships or these friendships, and, like, "Well, what happened to that friend?" And then so it's kinda like, I'm encouraging more and more people to just digitize, even if it's just a couple photos, or VHS tapes. Like, you have no idea the worlds of information that you can open up, at least to make those conversations a little bit more natural. Because I understand it's hard to just, like, go to mom and be like, "Hey, tell me why you and dad got divorced," you know?
Mhm.
But if maybe there's a little bit more context and you start talking about where we lived here and where we lived there, and, "Oh, you had these friends," and it's just sort of like, I don't know. And I think that the other part that we've already hit on a couple times is that there's an emotional release, there's a release of trauma. I think it's a tremendous gift that we can give to our loved ones when they know that we care so deeply about these stories. For our knowledge, yes, but almost, like, for their sake. Like, let's
Yes.
encourage them, like, "Hey, I know what I'm asking you to talk about might be difficult for you, might be really emotional for you. Like, I'm gonna hold space for that. There's no judgment." And I think a lot of that generation, like, there's fear of judgment, right? Because a lot of the things, let's be honest, a lot of things that they talk about that they did or said or whatever, like, in this society, in this culture, might be taboo. So we have to meet our family members where they're at with a ton of empathy.
Yep.
If you have burned some trust bridges with your parents or grandparents, you've, overstepped boundaries, like, make amends as quickly as you can and start having these conversations with empathy. But sorry, that was my little apple box rant.
No, I love that, and if we can show up with them with grace and compassion and
Mhm.
empathy and love, a lot of times those are feelings that they can't
Mm,
offer themselves because there's a lot of deep shame that people
mm.
have for decisions and actions that they've taken that they can't forgive themselves for. And so
Ugh.
a lot of times that gets in the way of our relationships with them. So if they can understand that we want to truly see them as the people they are, not just in their role or responsibility
Mm.
that they had to us. That we truly want to see them as people, especially as we're older and have realized now in our 40s how life is complicated and things are messy and things are not as easy as possible. It's an opportunity to really see these people that we care about and to heal and deepen a lot of those relationships. And
Yeah.
a lot of the times that can go to healing these generational traumas too. It can be incredibly healing for them as well as ourselves too.
What's been the most rewarding aspect for you from just your journey through estate planning and now working, I don't know, do you have a number? How many families have you helped at the time of this recording? How many individuals or families have you worked with?
I don't even know. I probably should go and capture it. I know my husband once calculated how many babies he had delivered here in the Coachella Valley, and it was over like 10,000.
Oh
So it was
my
pretty
gosh.
incredible for him to have that number. I don't have that number because honestly, it's my life's calling to be doing this work and to be helping as many people as I can. And if I can make an impact on one family's life, then that's
Mhm.
what matters to me. If it's 500, that's great. If I mean, I could roughly do the math, but every family is different and
Mhm.
unique. And I love that I get to have continuing relationships. I can let you know how many clients of mine have passed away. That's a number that I have.
Oh.
And so in the past 8 years that I've been doing this work, I've got 4 clients who've passed away.
Mm.
Um, and each of those has hit me pretty hard because they were all wonderful, beautiful. I'm
Yeah.
so lucky. Our team is so lucky. We literally have the best clients, I think anywhere. They really are become like part of our family, and we always love seeing them and talking to them and hearing about them. And so every
Yeah.
time someone leaves that family, it's really hard.
Mm.
Um, but the relief we get from the family members who call us because they took the time during their lifetimes to really clean things up,
Yeah.
make things as simple as possible for them, it's amazing. It's really amazing.
I love that you bring that up, the number of clients that have passed away. I've had 3 pass away of the roughly 20 video biographies that I've done, and it's been quite fascinating actually to watch families, like, response to death when they have something like a video biography in place, and I'm sure it's just interesting how both of us, we're doing work that you don't see the full benefit of until death, which is just like a
Mhm.
weird it's just such a weird service to offer when you think about, like, I know earlier you said, um, obviously we want our clients to stick around as long as as they can, and we do.
Lou
But ultimately, right, like, we're all up against this fate, and the real value of the service that we provide isn't going to be fully realized until that person is no longer with us. Now, there's
Our
tons of benefits to
clients
doing that.
may be Yeah. Our
Yeah, there's
clients may be our clients technically, but the work they do with us is for the people they love. So it's really the people they love, the family members of our clients who really receive the benefits of our work.
that's it, and that's something that I've tried to communicate to people is, um, you know, this is not something that you do as a I don't know, it's not an egotistical, self-serving thing, it's actually an intentional act of love for the people that you love.
Yeah.
You could say the same thing about estate planning. It's, I need to make sure that I have this in order because I love my children so much that I
Mhm.
want them to be in the best hands possible. I
Yeah.
want to make sure that whatever I've built, which isn't much, it's not, it's not getting eaten up in the probate system.
Mhm.
Right? Like, so it's just,
But it's also okay if people do wanna be egotistical and wanna get their stories captured. That's also totally okay, and it's absolutely totally okay if someone wants to do an estate plan because they wanna make sure that this one person doesn't get it, like, that's okay
that's
too.
it.
That's what I love about being human. We get to contain multitudes, and you and I are in service of those people and their families and
I love it.
all everything that comes along with it.
It's 100% agree with everything you're saying, and I am just so thrilled that we finally got to do this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and I just want to thank you so much for your time. And earlier you mentioned how how I've served the community, and I absolutely look at you and the work that you're doing, and not just through the law group, but as a person. Like, you're spoken of very highly in this community, and I'm sure that all of your clients would say the same. And so, I look up to you. I admire you for the work that you do and the way that you serve people. And I hope to serve people half as well as you do for half as long as you have. And so, thank you so much for your time and just energy and attention through this conversation. Is there anything else you want to say about um, what the work that you do, or parting words for our viewers who've stuck
Yeah,
with us?
I just want to say thank you for this time. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and the work that you do is absolutely incredible, and I definitely hope that you do this work, 2, 3, 4, 5 times as long as I do mine, not half as long, because the world really needs what you do. The world needs to be seen, and you really help see people, and translate their stories in beautiful ways that most people aren't able to do for themselves. So the work that you do is incredible, and I
Oh,
want
me
everyone
too.
to know about that, and I want, you mentioned 20 video biographies to date. Next time we have a chat, hopefully next year or whenever you're ready, I want that number to be, 10 times that number, if not more,
Man.
because it's amazing. You truly, truly, truly tell people's stories, and we need more of that in this world. There's so many incredible stories. Like, I want everyone's to be captured, and I really applaud you for everything you do.
So sweet. That was very kind. Thank you so much, Pantea. And please send our love to your husband, your two beautiful boys. And until next time, thanks everyone for watching. We will leave links to Pantea's website and her social channels in the link or the description for this video. And we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.